been living in it for about 3 years, and it was a step up from living in a camper. I had the idea to buy a travel trailer, gut it, and then just kind of do some upgrading, put a wood stove, but the travel trailer that I bought ended up being rotten, and I lived on a community farm where a good friend of mine built tiny houses. So when we discovered that the trailer I bought was completely rotten, he kind of laughed and said, well, I guess you have to build a tiny house. And then probably salvaged at least 80% of the material in the house for free from Craigslist. And the biggest ones was like demolition sites, so different construction sites obviously that were throwing out the entire, like all the plywood that built my house. All of the insulation, rigid insulation, designed it on a computer program with my friend. And he does a business called Nomadic Homes. Him and his apprentice mostly built it, and I did little things like put in the insulation, and friend painted my floor, and my other good friend who builds the houses, kind of artistically, I said, oh, do whatever you want, and he built me the ladder, and then he custom built me my French doors, and there's so it's quite a put together of, the friend owned a auto recycler, so all the metal and the roofing's from there. And this is the daybed, also storage, pops up, and there's a table in the middle and then benches on either side. Ladder that's also shelving, hand built by my good friend Adam from Nomadic Homes. And the best thing ever, I was telling you earlier, if you build one at least for yourself, skylight above the bed. Most beautiful experience I've had yet living in a house. Also, it's nice to have one that opens because they get quite hot in lofts, so it's nice to have an opening one. I would do more storage. So if people are building, you can. I know that most of them are like 8.5 to 9 feet wide, but you can build them 12 feet wide, which I would have done if I had more money. Floor that's really unfortunately quite dirty, but hand painted by my lovely friend Eve from Greenhaven Farm. I love finding used things. So for me, I love like rusty metal that I got from a friend's scrapyard, and got this on Craigslist, and it's cast iron and has spider webs, which I think is the most amazing thing ever. I really, really wanted an oven. I know some people just do the elements on the top, but for me, having an oven was key. And actually getting an oven this small is more expensive than having to get same with people that have the little miniature fireplaces. Like, I don't have that, but they're so expensive to get specialty things. But this one's from a camper, so that was actually probably the most expensive thing in this house. Ideally this will be solar at some point, but presently it's hooked in. I have propane, but then hooked into the power. And the dream is to have a bathhouse, and I did have a clawfoot tub before, and then you could heat it up underneath, and there's a creek back here that you could have the water going in and do a whole system. So that would be ideal. Just building a wood shed right now, because getting wood for your winter time and not having a wood shed is an awful idea. Water's from a well, and I just run probably a 300-foot potable water line. I know ideally one would bury it a foot, under the ground to keep it from freezing, but I did not want to dig 300 feet of foot deep trench, so mine just runs on the ground. And then I have cold water, no hot water, and I was explaining earlier that I actually really like the kind of ritual and process of boiling water to do your dishes or to wash your hair, or it slows things down, and I think that's one of the biggest attractions to this lifestyle is kind of more minimalism and slowing down, because we're a little bit too fast-paced, I think. Right? It's Pixie, my dearest companion. So another thing for anybody who likes clothing, myself, 3 shelves is not sufficient for all your clothes. So my car is literally it becomes like an extended part of my living. I literally carry all my camping supplies, all of half of my clothing in there. So yeah, that's the bedroom up yonder. And funnily enough, though, when you're up there and someone else is down here, you can create a lot of sense of privacy, which is nice as well. I used to have a big deck off the front of here, that's another thing for people that live tiny. Having a big deck completely extends your living situation, especially if you have it covered. I mean, that's a whole nother living area. But I moved and have now realized that building off your tiny house when you don't own the land is not necessarily the wisest idea. Yeah, unless you really know the people well. It all started probably when I went tree planting like 7 years ago. That was my introduction to living in a tent and living in a camper. And then I really, for me, that was a transition, living close to nature. I felt like I moved from downtown Victoria to, where did I move? Up to Cumberland after tree planting, and started living really close to nature, and then lived in a camper doing mushroom picking and tree planting. And I was like, wow, like you can step outside and brush your teeth, and just the feeling of connection for me to nature was so important, health-wise. And obviously we recognize that, you know, the world isn't the happiest place right now, I think, because of the disconnect. So for me, that was important. And then I loved being in the camper. I loved that I could go traveling and just close up my camper and didn't have to worry about it. Could come back. I loved that I could move it, and I only had to pay $150 at the time. So then I could work 2 or 3 days a week. You don't have any furniture. You can't collect things because it becomes just ridiculous. So you're constantly having to be aware of that.
Would you recommend this type of lifestyle to somebody?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it helped because I lived in a camper for a while, so I knew I liked it. It just feels so good. I mean, so many people right now, they can't find housing. You know, your landlord tells you to be quiet. And so finally, like, this is your own little space. It's completely yours, which is amazing. So if that's important to somebody. But I do have friends that built a tiny house, a couple in particular, you know, and they tried it and they didn't like it. So little things like, I like going to an outhouse outside of my house. Other people don't like that. I don't mind, you know. So it depends if you're okay to give up some creature comforts. Also, it depends if you're living by yourself or not. I think it can be challenging on a couple ship unless you have some really good techniques for sharing small spaces. The most ideal way for me living in a tiny house is to live in a community similar to this one, but I've lived in a place before where there was one big main house where people could come in and share space and do, you know, music and create food together, and then you have your autonomous space. That to me is ideal because it can get a little bit, I think, a little bit isolating if you're just kind of out in the cabin by yourself. Pros and cons. And I mean, I've been on 3 different pieces of land now and lived at eco-villages, and the biggest thing that comes up over and over is you just assume that you guys are going to have certain agreements that are the same, and it's like everything from, seriously, I have a heater in my house, everything to, I actually had someone who didn't want me burning a wood stove often, to didn't want me having a guest more than 2 nights, to, so the smallest little agreements you never would think would matter, to have those written up, because it's really uncomfortable when you recognize that where you've just set up your house is you know, you're not on the same page as the landowner, and then having to move is easy for some, but it's actually a massive hassle. Like, for example, a lot of people build decks or, you know, the woodshed, and this house is not happy to be moved a lot. Like, some of them are a bit more mobile, but it's so interesting. I go to work for 48 hours at a time in Victoria, and when I come back out here, it's like such a, like, yeah, decompression and relaxation. So I think that human beings across the board need more time in nature. I like, that's pretty proven for, you know, being happy and balanced. And so I think it's really a beautiful way to reconnect with nature and kind of get back in a slower pulse of being, which your entire, like, it's just de-stresses. It's relaxing, right? I hear the creek at nighttime. I don't even have wireless internet here. It's very peaceful, and I think we're in a great need for more peace, like, honestly. So that's what I gotta say. That sounds a bit cliche, but it's like, it's incredibly peaceful
Yeah.
to come here. And not only that, but just the subconscious stressors that most young people face of, you don't know if you'll get kicked out, especially in Victoria. You don't know, the rent is ridiculous. The subconscious relaxation and peacefulness that comes from knowing that you own something, that you only have to pay usually $300 a month, that it's incredibly assuring, and it's and you can concentrate so much more on other aspects of life and developing your creativity and all that kind of things when you have the space to do so, right?
Hey everybody, I'm Forrest. I'm the man behind the camera on the video you just saw. And for those wondering, and for those who don't know, I am still making the movie The Reality of Vanlife.
We're good. Are we rolling?
We're rolling.
Oh, hell yeah. So what's your story? How come you're living in a van?
How come I'm living in a van? I have so many reasons.
This is going to be a 45 to 60 minute long feature documentary. At a lot of ways, it's looking at the challenges and the reality of van life. In other ways, it's looking at the broader spectrum of how van life is romanticized on social media and critically and comedically exploring that idea. So if you're interested in that movie, a lot of updates will be on this channel. So stay tuned for that. Feel free to subscribe. There will be lots of updates on the community tab as well as in these films. I'm making this film with the goal to sell it to Netflix. I'm not exactly sure when it will be released, but hopefully sometime this spring for a limited theatrical release, and then people will be able to view it hopefully on Netflix or some other streaming site like that. So thank you all for sticking with me this far in my journey and for watching my YouTube channel and being part of this community. I'll see you guys next week for another alternative living documentary, and stay tuned for more updates about the reality of #vanlife.